Laura arrived at her cousin's quiet Ohio home with a heavy heart and a tired smile, carrying a small suitcase and the weight of a life that had recently cracked apart. Because her long relationship had ended without drama, but with deep silence, the kind that follows broken promises and unanswered questions. The house felt familiar yet distant, filled with soft ticking clocks and memories that belonged to another version of her. A woman who once believed stability would protect her from loneliness. She had come for a short stay, just a few days to reset, to breathe, to feel grounded again, and she told herself this visit would be simple and calm. Her cousin was out running errands, and the house was mostly still, except for the faint sound of footsteps upstairs belonging to Ethan, her cousin's son, who had grown from a curious child into a responsible young man with a steady job and a polite way of speaking that always made adults trust him. Laura exchanged a brief hello with him earlier, noticing how time had reshaped him into someone confident yet gentle. And then she retreated to the guest room, hoping for a moment alone. After unpacking, she went to the bathroom to wash her face, letting cool water run over her skin as she stared into the mirror, noticing the fine lines near her eyes and the sadness she tried to hide, reminding herself that change did not mean failure, only movement. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, when the door suddenly opened without warning, and Ethan stood there, frozen in shock. His hands still on the handle, his expression filled with immediate regret. Laura felt a jolt of surprise, her heart jumping, but there was no fear, only awkward stillness. It's the kind that lasts a second too long and before anything could be said. Ethan apologized quickly and stepped back, closing the door with clear respect. Laura stood there alone again, the quiet rushing back in. But something inside her had shifted, not because of what happened, but because of how it made her feel unexpectedly present, reminded that life could still interrupt her thoughts and pull her back into the moment. She finished washing her face, her hands slightly unsteady, and laughed softly at herself, knowing the situation was innocent yet strangely meaningful, like a reminder she hadn't asked for. Later, as she walked down the hallway, she sensed Ethan's discomfort from the other side of the house, felt the weight of unspoken apologies and the shared wish to forget the moment. But Laura didn't feel upset, only thoughtful, as if the house itself had nudged her awake. She realized she had spent months feeling unseen, moving through days on autopilot, and that brief interruption had shaken her routine. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made her aware of her own existence again. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she looked out the window at the quiet street, understanding that the surprise wasn't the door opening, it was the feeling that followed. The awareness that her story wasn't over, that she still had chapters left to write, even if she didn't yet know how they would begin. Dinner that evening moved with a quiet tension that Laura could feel even before she sat at the table. The kind of tension that comes from an unspoken moment hanging in the air. And although no one mentioned what had happened earlier, it shaped every glance and pause. Ethan kept busy setting plates and pouring water, avoiding her eyes not out of fear but out of respect. And Laura noticed this immediately, understanding that he was trying to protect her comfort as much as his own. She appreciated that more than he knew. As they ate, the conversation stayed light, filled with safe topics about work, weather, and neighborhood news. Yet Laura's mind drifted elsewhere, pulled back into her own thoughts about how life had quietly changed without her. Noticing, she watched Ethan speak with calm confidence, explaining his plans to move to another city for a better job. And she realized how strange it felt to see someone so young yet so certain, while she, at her age, felt unsure of her next step. His focus stirred something inside her, not attraction, but reflection. A mirror held up to her own stalled dreams and the years she had spent putting herself second. As he talked, Laura remembered the early days of her past relationship, when hope had felt easy and the future wide open, before compromises slowly turned into sacrifices and love became routine instead of joy. She had stayed longer than she should have, believing patience would fix what honesty never did. And now that chapter was closed, leaving behind an empty space she didn't know how to fill. After dinner, Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice careful as he apologized again, wanting to be sure she truly felt okay. And Laura reassured him with a gentle smile, telling him there was nothing to forgive and thanking him for his maturity. The relief on his face was clear, and with that, the weight between them eased, allowing the house to feel normal again. Later, Laura stepped outside onto the porch, the night air cool against her skin, and she realized the discomfort of the day had pushed her toward a deeper truth she could no longer ignore. She missed being noticed, not in a dramatic way, but in the simple sense of being acknowledged, of feeling present in someone's world. And that realization hurt more than the breakup itself. It wasn't Ethan who made her feel this way, but the sudden awareness that she had been living quietly, shrinking herself to fit into a life that no longer fit her. Sitting alone, she accepted that longing did not always point toward another person, but often toward parts of ourselves we leave behind, and for the first time in a long while. Laura felt a restless energy rising, urging her to stop waiting for clarity and start moving toward it, even if she didn't yet know where it would lead. Morning arrived quietly, but Laura woke with a mind that would not slow down. As if the night had pressed all her thoughts closer together, demanding attention. She got dressed early and stepped outside before anyone else was awake, walking through the calm neighborhood where trimmed lawns and parked cars lined the street, and with each step, her thoughts grew clearer. She realized the surprise she experienced the day before had nothing to do with embarrassment or discomfort, but with awareness, because it forced her to face how disconnected she had become from herself. For years, she had shaped her life around stability, routine, and compromise, convincing herself that comfort was enough, even when joy slowly faded. She remembered how often she ignored her own needs, how she stopped chasing interests that once excited her, telling herself there would be time later, until later quietly disappeared. As she walked, she felt both regret and relief. Regret for the years she spent standing still, and relief that she could still choose differently. When she returned to the house, sunlight filled the kitchen, and Ethan was there packing his bag for work. Moving quickly, focused, already living in the direction he had chosen, he greeted her warmly, the awkwardness gone, replaced by a natural ease that made the space feel lighter. They talked briefly about the day ahead, about schedules and plans, and Laura listened closely, noticing how grounded he seemed, how comfortable he was with where he stood in life. Before leaving, Ethan paused and looked at her with honest respect, telling her it was good to have her visit and that she was always welcome. Words spoken simply but with meaning. Laura thanked him and told him he was doing well, that his effort and kindness showed more than he realized, and the smile he gave in return felt genuine and warm. After he left, the house grew quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt open, like space waiting to be filled. Laura sat by the window watching the street come alive, and understood something important. That admiration does not always mean desire, and emotion does not always point outward. Sometimes, a moment only exists to reflect who we are and who we've become. She accepted that the feeling she struggled to name was not about Ethan or anyone else, but about her own longing to feel awake, valued, and engaged with life again. The truth settled gently but firmly in her heart, telling her that healing did not require another person's attention, only her own honesty. She stood up with new resolve, realizing she could no longer wait for something to change on its own, because change needed action, even small ones. The visit had given her more than rest. It had given her clarity. And as she began planning her departure, she felt ready to move forward, not running from the past, but stepping into a future she was finally willing to shape for herself. Laura packed her things early that afternoon, feeling lighter than she had in weeks, as though the quiet house and her brief Unexpected encounters had cleared away the fog that had settled over her mind for months, and she moved through the rooms with careful attention, noticing small details she had overlooked before, the sunlight catching the edges of the curtains, the faint scent of fresh coffee lingering in the kitchen, the way the floorboards creaked just slightly when stepped on. All simple reminders that life was moving forward even if she had paused. She walked through the house one last time, her thoughts alive with reflection, remembering the awkward moment in the bathroom, the quiet dinner, and the morning of clarity, realizing that none of it had been embarrassing or uncomfortable in the way she had feared. Instead, it had been a series of gentle nudges toward self-awareness, moments that forced her to confront her own needs and desires and reminded her that she had neglected herself while worrying too much about appearances and expectations. As she loaded her suitcase into the car, she felt a sense of gratitude toward the house, toward her cousin, and even toward Ethan, who had been polite, thoughtful, and unassuming throughout her visit, each interaction reinforcing her understanding that human connection could be meaningful without being complicated, and that respect, honesty, and kindness often left a deeper mark than grand gestures. Driving away from the quiet suburban streets, Laura reflected on what she had learned, recognizing that the surprise she had experienced was not about shock or intrusion, but about awareness on awakening that reminded her she was alive, capable of feeling deeply and deserving of attention, not from others, but from herself. And the feeling followed her like a gentle current, steady and undeniable, guiding her thoughts toward the life she wanted to reclaim. She decided not to dwell on the past or the relationships that had faded, but to focus instead on the small, intentional steps that would allow her to live fully. And she began planning how she could reintroduce joy, creativity, and connection into her days, remembering the hobbies she had abandoned, the friends she had let drift away, and the simple pleasures that once made her heart light. Weeks passed quickly after her return home, and Laura found herself enrolling in a photography class she had postponed for years. Spending afternoons capturing light and shadow, shapes and movement, and through the lens she rediscovered not only the world but her own perspective. Realizing that beauty often existed in the unnoticed, the overlooked, and the ordinary, much like the small, fleeting moments she had experienced at her cousin's house. She reconnected with old friends, accepting invitations to lunches and walks, laughing more freely than she had in a long time. And she began to notice how much of her energy had been restored, simply by choosing to engage with life rather than letting it pass quietly by. One morning, while standing in line at a cafe, she caught the gaze of a stranger who smiled warmly. And instead of turning away as she might have in the past, she smiled back, feeling a sense of presence and confidence that had been absent for years. And it struck her that life's surprises were often gentle, guiding rather than dramatic, showing her that clarity, self-love, and attention could change her world without warning. Laura knew she was no longer waiting for someone else to see her, to validate her existence, because she had learned to see herself, to honor her own heart, and to embrace the small moments of awakening that reminded her she was alive, capable, and worthy. And as she stepped out into the busy street with a newfound lightness, she understood that every day offered a chance to start anew, to live intentionally, and to notice the unexpected gifts hidden within ordinary moments. And for the first time in a long time, she felt completely ready to welcome them.